Hello, my name is Darren Stepansky from AqMB. I'm here to talk to you about a new product we've called AqSync, which is a plugin we've developed to transfer process design data from AqMB Designer to Plant3D. Now, coincidentally, Plant3D is now also includes Autodesk P&ID and Plant3D as one product. And there is another plugin that Autodesk have developed called P&ID Modeler for Revit, which would allow you to go essentially from a BFD to a PFD to a P&ID and then onto a 3D model and then back potentially with relative ease. So starting with our PFD in AqMB Designer, we can see here it's we've got a pump, screen, a UF. We've defined some process design parameters, some basic ones here: backwash interval, backwash fluxes, the number of modules, surface area, etc. And similarly for the lamella, we've defined a few parameters here: lamella plate area. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sync this information with Plant3D. So let me go into my Plant3D. First thing is we have a plugin here under add-ins called AqSync. I'm going to click on that plugin. Now it's going to request that I log in. And obviously not everyone who has a plugin installed can access these PFDs in AqMB Designer. You have to be essentially an enabled Plant3D user, and you have to have access as a Plant3D user to a particular project. But obviously I've set this up for myself, so I will go in here and put in my login credentials, and presto, I get a list of all the PFDs that I can pull down from AqMB Designer. So when I click the PFD of interest, I can see I've got the username, so my email address, my details are there, the name of the plant, the name of the project, and the version number as well, and the date it's modified. So all that information is there. The next thing I need to do is actually sync that information down to Plant3D. So I'm going to hit this button here, which should pull through all the PFD details. Now, Plant3D may grumble a little bit as it tries to find the information, but if it's successful, we should see this dialog here. Everything will be imported, pulled to new drawing. So I click OK, and when it's finished, the dialog box should close like there, and then I can see here on the bottom left I've got my PFD. So if we go back and just compare that against what we had in AqMB Designer, we've effectively pulled through everything from the drawing numbers, the equipment numbers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 9, etc., into Plant3D. So the drawing numbers and the unit numbers, and just like we've got there. Now, first thing I'm going to do is hit save. So I've now got my initial PFD into my preferred CAD software, and what I would now like to do is if I was the draftsman or another engineer working on this model, and I had wanted to change some of these parameters. Let's say, for example, I had an update that was changed in here on the lamella. Let me go into my data manager and take a look at the information that's come across in the first instance. So we can see here in the data manager, if I click on the lamella, that the tag number's there. There's no description, no manufacturer details. But if I scroll across, we've got these fields here: the area, the number, which is the tag number, and the quantity. Let me just change that area to to a larger number, let's on the assumption that my engineer is now working on this project in Plant3D, but he still needs to communicate this information with the process engineer who's doing all the simulations. So I'm also going to specify a model number here, and then I'm going to hit save. And what I'm going to try and do in this first instance is just see if that information is then replicated in AqMB Designer. So again, I go back to my plugin, click on AqSync, and this time I want to go sync to AqMB. So what I can do is then hit on this sync to AqMB button, and it should bring up a table of all the changes, what's been modified. I can see the lamella has been modified. Obviously I added those things, and there's nothing in the connections that have been modified. So I know I've just modified some attributes. I'm just going to push the attributes only. Now when I push those attributes, okay, the dialog box closes. I know that's gone through. Just going to hit save for good measure. Now let's see if that information came across into AqMB Designer. So when I go in here and I want to view that drawing again, the first thing I would note here is down the bottom we've got review AutoCAD changes. Now if I didn't see that come up, for example, and I was just going to edit that plant, because normally you wouldn't know if somebody's changed the PFD or the PNID in Plant3D. If I simply wanted to edit that plant, as the process engineer, I can see straight away that there are AutoCAD revisions to this plant. Saving this version will overwrite them. So I want to review those revisions first. And okay, well, we can see there are no line changes, no process design changes, maybe just some attributes that we can't see as yet. So I'm just going to save that. Now, just to be sure, so I know what those changes are, we have a handy version history tool which allows you as an engineer to compare from version to version what has actually changed. So I'll just select my previous version, which is version 6, and this new version that's come back from Plant3D, and I'm going to compare those two versions, and we can see, okay, so under plant, version numbers changed, okay, and we've changed the lamella properties from 20 to 35 square meters per hour. Okay, so great. So that's good. Now, what if I wanted to continue designing as the process engineer in AqMB, and I wanted to transfer those updates to Plant3D? How would we go about doing that? Well, quite simple, really. So for example, I've expanded this process now, and I'm going to actually add a cartridge filter. Let's add a cartridge filter and let's just add an RO for good measure. And so I can go in and define these parameters here. So I'm just going to switch to operating mode. We're going to call it cart filter, and we're going to keep it as a depth. We're going to change the number of carts to 40 carts. Cartridge length 30 inch. Okay, we'll keep that. And my RO, what are we going to do here with the RO? We're going to look at, okay, we're going to make the low recovery. Let's give it 82 recovery. Change my membrane type. And we're going to specify the design flux and specify the, actually we'll switch to operating mode and we'll specify the array. So we're going to give it a 12 elements in series, 12-8 array, no vessels in the third stage, and I'm going to hit OK. Then, okay, so everything else is enabled here. I'm going to hit save. Now, theoretically, the next time the draftsman or whoever's driving Plant3D pulls those changes or makes a pull request, we should see some sort of update come through into Plant3D. So we're just going to test that process. So I'm switching back into Plant3D. Let me get rid of this drawing one. And I'm still logged in, so I'll just click on the AqSync plugin. We have the drawing open, and I want to sync changes back to Plant3D to see if there's been any updates. So again, this comparison tool gives me a list of what may have changed, so I can see that the lamella. Okay, so we've got some details that have been added. The cartridge filter and an RO have been added as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to pull these changes down. All right. So we can see we've got the cartridge filter and the RO there. Now let's see what we have in our data manager. If I click on home, because the drawing is one thing, but obviously we want the process design parameters to be translated as well, and if there are any dimensioning data, defining vessel size and so on, we want that translated as well. So we can see stage 1, 12 vessels, stage 2, 8, the membrane that we've selected, the design flux, the lead element flux, the recovery. So all that information is there in the lamella. So we can see the manufacturer, the model number is now being obviously synced there. We've got a cartridge filter, the description we have, the rating, and I think we had, 40 cartridges. Okay, and it's a 30-inch cartridge length. Okay, so we can see from that the information is going from AqMB Designer into Plant3D, and then potentially onto the 3D model in Revit, using P&ID Modeler for Revit. So now what if we do have some sizing information, like one question that's come up before is whether any sizing information, like let's take a vessel diameter, whether that could be mapped through into a 3D model, and the short answer is yes, as long as it's defined as a parameter in Designer, AqMB Designer that is, and then we can translate it into P&ID/Plant3D and then onto Revit or into Plant3D simply by mapping it to the correct field. So it's a little bit of project setup that needs to be done for that to occur in Plant3D, but it's certainly possible. Now, so that's showing information, both process design data and drawing information going down into Plant3D. What if I wanted to send information back to AqMB that was that included adding more equipment? So, for example, I'm looking at this drawing here. I'm going to consider adding a couple lines and a tank. So So maybe let's go and find a tank. So we can see, I'm going to select this tank because we have these items here that come part of the project template that are essentially water treatment unit operations that, for which models exist in AqMB Designer. Now, if somebody selects a unit op that we don't have a model for in AqMB, then we simply replace it with our black box, which is simply just that. It's a black box and doesn't have any process design details tied. I can also add manufacturer details for each of my equipment in AqMB, and they will be compiled here as well. So we can get a sync of information and make sure that it's in tune with between AqMB and Autodesk Plant3D. Okay, so so I might do that actually. I might actually add. I'm just going to specify some information here on my. As I've worked through my different vendors, I've gone out. I've requested quotes using AqMB Designer, and I've got information back. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to now specify which particular manufacturer I want to use, and it might be this one. Okay, and I can go as far as specifying materials, connections, description, yada yada yada. So now these are all strings, so these are all text fields, mind you. Now back to the question around sizing. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop in a piece of equipment that does have diameters or heights available that are important for 3D models. So I know, for example, that I have a let's call it a media filter here, which if I just, you wouldn't normally do this, but let's say we were to do this. I switch to operating mode. I can specify here my properties of my bed and my vessel diameter. Okay, so let's give it a 3 meter diameter, and I could also specify the cross-sectional area, but let's leave the diameter fixed. Is there any straight shell height on this one, on the media filter? No. Okay, so straight multimedia filter. Going to hit save, and then I'm going to sync those changes down to Plant3D. So heading back to my Plant3D, again, make sure what's there is saved, and back to my AqSync plugin, and inside my drawing I want to grab that PFD and I want to sync to Plant3D, and I should see that there's been a media filter added and connections. Okay, I can see UF's been modified, lamella's been modified. Okay, I can see a few parameters there, and I've added a media filter, and those properties have been added, and it's telling me I've also put some connections in. So I'm going to pull those changes down. Okay, and there we go. So we've got our media filter, which is joined, and that information should also reside in our data manager, and starting with, if I go to that media filter, fixed bed filter, MMF, we can see that we've got the vessel diameter is there, and the media volume that we specified is there as well. So as long as those parameters, if this parameter was mapped to a 3D model and we had a 3D model of a media filter we wanted to use, then any change made in AqMB Designer could theoretically go through and update your 3D model. Okay, so that's it in a nutshell. So you can see that we've got effectively a bidirectional sync on not only entities and lines, but also all the process design data between AqMB, which is a process design, modeling, and PLM tool, mostly for process engineers, and Plant3D, P&ID Plant3D, which is a drafting tool from Autodesk, mostly driven by draftsmen, but sometimes by project engineers as well. So that's it from me. If you've got any questions, check us out at www.aqmb.net or get in touch at info@aqmb.net. Okay, thank you.